Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Ahlulbayt Live on Ahlulbayt TV, and congratulations to everyone on the birth of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And tonight we're going to be looking at, for the next hour and a half, lessons that we can take from the life of Imam Hussain alayhi salam in terms of trust and also, or tawakkul, and also perseverance, especially in these trying times. What can we learn, or how can we aspire to become persevering like him? Also, inshallah, in the second half we will be looking at how we can learn from the loyalty of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam. And finally, in the last part, we'll be looking at, inshallah, the survival of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, and how after the tragedy of Karbala he still managed to maintain gratitude and much, we could say, positive thinking in his du'as in spite of everything that he had been through. And my guest is Haji Ghulam Abbas Laka, and do feel free to call in with any questions or comments. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome. Alaikum.
Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you for your kind invitation.
And your thoughts as well. So just to begin with the birth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, there's been a lot of celebrations going on, obviously, especially in Karbala as well. And obviously the relevant question is, aside from all of these celebrations and remembering him, how is his birth relevant to us and to the younger generations growing up today in this world?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. All praise to Allah, the Creator of the universes and their Sustainer, the Provider of believers and non-believers. And may His choicest blessings be on the seal of His prophets, the last of His messengers and His holy progeny, and in particular on the illustrious grandson of the Holy Prophet, on Abu Abdullah Hussain salawatullahi alayhi. The question you pose, I think, goes to the heart of what it means to be a Muslim today. Because the birth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam is not just of relevance to the followers of the Ahlulbayt alayhi salam, because this was a birth that was celebrated by the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny himself, and therefore should be a beacon in the calendar of all Muslims globally. And I think it is pertinent that the birth of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam follows the day of the birth of his master, and Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam follows immediately thereafter, such that we have a golden chain from each of them in terms not just of their history, but for us today living in 21st century Britain and globally, there are key attributes that each has shown that are important for living our lives today in keeping with the values that inspire us.
Right.
So with Imam Hussain alayhi salam, the principle of tawakkul and perseverance. So having trust in Allah, but persevering in the path that inspires us despite the challenges that lie there. Secondly, with Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, looking at aspects of service through loyalty to the Imam of your time, such that when we remember and celebrate the birth of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, it's in the context of the birth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam.
Yeah.
And then, of course, thirdly, the birth of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. The relevance of that is with regard to the psychology of Sajjad alayhi salam. And we live in times where aspects of mental health are very important.
Yeah.
And I think it's pertinent to look at some of the recent developments in modern psychology and look at it through the lens of the psychology that he has left for us. Turning more specifically to the point that you raised, the actual events of the birth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, they relate to us in two or three ways. But I think one of the most powerful is as related through the teaching of the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny, brought to us by a variety of sources. And it is narrated that at the time of the birth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and this is a narration that is well known, so I'll be brief, but I want to look at it from the point of view how we apply it.
Okay.
So for the benefit of our young people who may not be familiar with it, and for those who are new to our community, it is narrated that at the time of the birth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, the angel Jibreel was descending through the heavens to visit the Holy Prophet, to convey the congratulations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his messenger for the birth of his grandson. And he passed through an area that was an area of banishment.
Yeah.
And one of God's angels, called Fitrus, had been banished there for delaying the implementation of Allah's commands. Not contradicting it, as we often do, but simply delaying it. And he had spent many years in istighfar, in seeking forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time. So when he saw the angel Jibreel passing, he asked him where he was going. And when Jibreel told him, Fitrus said, well, as part of the punishment that I faced, my wings have been removed from me. Would you be kind enough to carry me with you to the Holy Prophet so that he may be able to intercede for me on this joyous occasion? So when Jibreel reached the Holy Prophet and conveyed to him the congratulations of divinity itself, he then presented the case of Fitrus. And the Holy Prophet's response was, ask the angel, and there are two versions of this, to rub his arms, where his wings were, either against the body of the baby, Imam Hussain, or against his cradle. There are two versions of it. But irrespective of that particular detail, the principle is what matters, because when he did, so effectively when he sought the intercession of this luminous person who had been born, he was forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his wings were restored. Now, the application of this for us is threefold. Firstly, a warning that in our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not just a question of fulfilling the principles, but doing so promptly. And that's doubly hard. But secondly, there is a message of salvation here. That when we fail, and who amongst us doesn't fail? Indeed, who amongst us doesn't fail regularly? Because that's often an attribute of our fitrah, of our makeup, that we forget, as the teachings often say. We must not allow shaitan to deceive us into thinking we are now trapped by the mistakes of our past. No, the future can and always is available to us for being much brighter than any darkness that our past may have visited upon us. So how do we free ourselves from the problems of the past and enter into the salvation of the future? Well, the path is laid open for us through seeking the intercession of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And when we do, therefore, we're practicing sunnah. This is not bid'ah, astaghfirullah, it's not innovation, as we are told. And, nowadays, members of the Shia community are murdered just for reciting Friday prayers, as we saw just a few days ago. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may elevate the souls of those people who were so mercilessly killed, and indeed give peace and patience to their families. And that's relevant for us, because we need to be confident that the followers of the Ahlulbayt are the true Ahlul Sunnah. And this practice of seeking intercession is corroborated in the Holy Quran. In Surah Baqarah, verse 255, it says very clearly, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَوْ إِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. Who is there who can intercede with him, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than through his permission? So we are not practicing anything other than true monotheism, because there is no power except Allah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So that all the opportunities for salvation, for shafa, through the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, for instance Imam Hussain alayhi salam, is prescribed in the Holy Quran and encouraged in the Sunnah.
Thank you. Again, I mean, some people will say, with regard to that statement from Holy Quran, that it only applies to the last day or akhirah. So there's also that argument that you can say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it clear that He has given certain people the permission of intercession. And I've actually also read in narrations from Sunni Hadith collections that even, as an example, a group of 70 pious people can act as a form of intercession for the deceased.
True, but the Quran is very clear in helping us understand the Quran, because the Quran also says وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. This is Surah Al-Imran, verse 169, which says, and do not regard those who have been killed fi sabilillah, in the way of Allah. And who is there who can challenge that that's what happened to Imam Hussain alayhi salam? And it says, do not regard those who have been killed in the way of Allah as dead. Bal ahyaun, rather they are alive, they have spiritual life. In the rabbihim, with their Lord, yurzaqun, is their spiritual sustenance, their spiritual life. Indeed, the same principle is reiterated in the earlier Surah Baqarah, which ends by saying, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ, but you do not perceive. So the deficiency in those who do not understand the Ayatul Kursi that we discussed earlier, the deficiency is one of perception rather than the validity of the true Islamic creed.
Thank you. And then looking at his perseverance, it's kind of interesting because obviously, well, there's been centuries and centuries of persecution, difficulty, people getting attacked for what they believe in, and of course that's going on regularly at the moment as well. And I mean, I would not say that I'm the one to tell anyone to have tawakkul, because I'm sitting here in London and I'm not somewhere in Pakistan or Bahrain or, you know, Qatif, or so it's not for me to go and tell someone else to have tawakkul. But still, I think the suffering of our brothers and sisters across the world still affects us. It affects your heart, you know, it affects your, you know, you wish you could do something, and so still there is that need for some kind of psychological perseverance and that spiritual perseverance to keep on with the, you know, the practice, the trust, the iman, and passing on the knowledge as well, trying many other things, you know, in terms of supporting the orphans and things like that. So,
well, I mean, your own publications recently on the spiritual magnanimity of the Ahlulbayt al-Islam and the spiritual practices that they've taught, you know, you have very kindly shared in your published work some of these core principles, for which I'm grateful. And we find that there are various teachings, in particular, there are 4 that I think we can apply today. And I agree, this is not about lecturing to anyone else. This is about each of us drinking at the fountain of the Ahlulbayt to satiate our own thirst. And in so doing, empowering ourselves, our families and our communities collectively to be more effective in serving the cause of Islam, and thereby serving the cause of humanity as a whole. This is not about them and us. This is about all of creation working together to be more fulfilled in achieving the potential that has been laid at the center of the fitrah of a human being. And to begin with, the first of the 4 techniques that I think we can use from Imam Hussain alayhi salam is dua, or is supplication. And there are 2 principles in the du'as that Imam Hussain has left for us. The first is the relationship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us, and the second is our relationship to Him. So when we look at Dua Arafah, for instance, he seeks forgiveness and pardon from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that he erred, but this is of course a teaching for us in how to approach divinity, in how to supplicate. And the phrase that he uses is bihilmika wa judik, that I seek your pardon through your hilm, through your forbearance, which is his relationship to us, and his jud. And the word jud being a particular kind of generosity that has no reciprocal. So when we receive, there is nothing we can possibly do to repay that. And indeed it is noteworthy that his illustrious father, Imam Ali alayhi salam, used the same attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Dua Kumail, in seeking closeness to Allah. Allahumma inni as'aluka bijudika an tudniyani min qurbik, to draw me closer to you, so that any proximity we may achieve to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes with a vaccine, with an inoculation against arrogance, because then whatever we experience as proximity is His gift in drawing us closer, rather than our striving and achieving, in inverted commas.
I think that's a very important point as well, because sometimes, also many people get into this form of thinking of, well, I in a sense, I have earned what I've put in. I've put in my 5 this or that, or my 500 this or that, or my tesbihs and this and that, and my surah that. So I'm owed. I need. This is the reward.
There is no spiritual bank account.
Yeah.
There is just grace, and this is the reality we have.
Beautiful. And then, of course, looking at putting it in modern terms, which I think is kind of it's interesting, because this is it needs to be translated in a sense into these terms. The stress management that Imam Hussain, and I think all of Ahlulbayt, I think this is, they were all masters of stress management, and this is where again, Islam can give you that inner strength and that inner, we could say, tranquility. Even, I mean, this is another thing where we see the suffering of other, people, human beings, Shia around the world, and you imagine that they're going to be in a state of, this traumatized state, and crying and upset, and often, the people bear it with a lot of, again, grace or patience, more than perhaps we imagine we could.
Yes, indeed, indeed. I mean, we have in our midst so-called ordinary people in the community who are extraordinary in their ability to withstand, to forbear the difficulties of life. And, I salute those people, because it is incredibly difficult. And the Quran warns us of this. Surah 29 verse 2 says, "Do people think that they will be left alone," i.e. not tested, simply because they say we believe, and will not be tested? So really there is a very clear warning that you will be tested. That's what this is for. Surah 47 verse 31 says, "And we will surely test you until we make evident those among you who strive for the cause of Allah, and the patient, and we will test your affairs." But we're also told how to deal with it. So Baqarah Surah 2 verse 153 has the famous line, "Inna Allah ma'as sabirin," that Allah is with the patient ones. But it comes with a qualification in a preceding verse, in verse 45. It says, "And seek help through patience and prayer, and indeed it is difficult, except for the humbly submissive to Allah." And this is where we can turn to the lessons of the Ahlulbayt al-Muslim, in particular Imam Hussain alayhi salam and his illustrious grandfather, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his progeny, in helping us deal with this. And this brings me to the second technique. So the first being supplication, dua, seeking Allah's help through His Jude and through His helm, through His infinite generosity and through His forbearance. The second technique is as taught to us by the Holy Prophet, and we see this practiced by Imam Hussain alayhi salam. It is narrated that when the Holy Prophet was in battle, so in a very stressful situation, remember all these battles were defensive battles. No matter what the media may seek to portray the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, as astaghfirullah, being aggressive, he wasn't. His battles were all in self-defense. And of course this was in the heat of Arabia, and at one occasion he found the weight of his armor very difficult to bear. And so it was a stressful situation. And how many times do we find the armor that we carry in our lives, the emotional armor, the intellectual armor, the social armor, wearing? You find it exhausting. The kind of politics we have to play at work to keep our jobs, the diplomacy required in our personal and social lives, all these armors we put up to defend ourselves is exhausting.
Good point.
And one of the aspects of stress, when we analyze what stress is psychologically, one of the components that really turns up the volume of that stress is the feeling of loneliness, that we are alone in this battle that we have to face. And here we find Jibril comes down, the angel Jibril comes down with an armor. he says to him that divinity has granted you a protection for you and your people. And this is Dua Joshan Kabir,
right.
the great protection. And I'd like to just, in the interest of time, end on one stanza of it, because Dua Joshan Kabir is split into 100 stanzas.
Yeah.
And in total proclaiming 1,000 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Stanza 59, I think is very relevant for our time today, because it talks about dispelling this sense of loneliness that is at the heart of stress. And if we can form that connection with Allah, we can empower ourselves to climb out of the ditch of loneliness and stress. So to just quote the first line, it says, Ya Habiba man la Habiba lah, oh, the intimate friend of one who has no friend. And if we have stresses about our health or our mental health, it says, Ya Tabiba man la Tabiba lah, oh, the one who cures, not just the doctor, the doctor with the cure that's effective for one who has nobody to turn to in this. And it continues in that regard, stressing the point that we are not alone.
Thank you very much. And inshallah, we'll continue our discussion after the break. We're just going to break. We'll be back, inshallah, in a few minutes. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live on Ahlulbayt TV. In this part of the programme, we're going to be, in light of the birth of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, we're going to be reflecting on the attribute of loyalty, or his quality of loyalty to the Imam of his time. And again, turning that back on ourselves and thinking about, especially under a lot of the psychological pressure that is going on from all angles today, how we can, again, improve, we could say, our loyalty to the Imam of our time. So there were certain points you wanted to cover for this.
Well, I think the example of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam is very relevant for us today, seeking to understand what is our role in our relationship with the Imam of our time. May Allah hasten his reappearance. Even if we may not be alive at the time when he physically reappears, let us pray that at least we may experience a spiritual dhuhur in our hearts, a spiritual appearance in our hearts, so that we may connect with him. But we need to know how, and in what context, and what does it take from us. And I think this is where it's important to celebrate the birth of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, because we learn a lot from his life in doing so. It is, of course, a fitting aspect of history that the first face he saw when he was born was of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. It is narrated that Imam Ali alayhi salam placed the young baby in the hands of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and he opened his eyes when he was in the hands of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and his first sight in the world was his face, as was his last. But we learn a few things, and there are two in particular that I'd like to focus on, because I think they relate to what it means to be a follower of the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam in the 21st century. The first is the principle of service. And there was no ordinary service that Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam offered. In fact, his service was broad and deep. But there's one strand that runs through it that bears reflection. And that is his sakaya, his title of being the sakar, the one who gave water. But the philosophy of this is much deeper than that. Because, of course, he inherited this title from his father, Imam Ali alayhi salam. It didn't go to Imam Hassan alayhi salam or Imam Hussain alayhi salam. It went to Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, because he was the representative of Imam Ali alayhi salam in Karbala. But throughout his life, you see him implementing the principle of sakar, which goes to the early history of the Banu Hashim. We have Hazrat Qusay having set up kiosks, water kiosks, on the outskirts of Makkah for the pilgrims, for the Hujjaj, so that they may be quenched of their thirst. And this idea of the one who provides water historically is very important in an Arab context, because of course they lived in the desert. So the one to whom you look to, on whom you rely for water, is effectively the de facto leader of the community.
Yeah.
Hence, if you look at the lineage of those who held the title, Hazrat Qusayd and Hazrat Hashim, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, Hazrat Abu Talib, Imam Ali, these are really important personalities, of course. Now, when we get to Imam Ali, he took the principle of Sakaya to a whole new level. Because when the Holy Prophet, in the Battle of Badr, was thirsty in the middle of the night, none of the companions had the courage to climb down into the well in the middle of the night to bring water for the Holy Prophet, other than Imam Ali alayhi salam. He had the title of the Saki for a reason. And we also see his chivalry, his integrity and his dignity in the Battle of Siffin with Muawiyah. When Imam Ali alayhi salam had control of the water, he did not withhold water to the enemy.
Yeah.
And we have that in sharp contradistinction to what happened in Karbala. But when we look at Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, when he inherited the title, he continued with this practice. And we have, the annals of history are very clear. In Abu Mikhna, for instance, very well reputed historian, who was a contemporary at the time. It is said that his father was one of the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam. In his Maqtal of Karbala, it is narrated that when they were Dhu Husn and they had the encounter with the 1,000-strong brigade of Hur, it was Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam who supervised the giving of water to all the soldiers and indeed the animals as well. Oh. And I think there is an aspect of animal ethics here that is quite important, because when we talk about service, it is service to all sentient creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need to be mindful of that in our interactions with all of creation.
Sorry, I was going to say I think this is a light point as well, because often there's this debate that sometimes if you kind of draw attention to some animal welfare issue, people almost take it as an insult. It's like, why are you focusing on an animal?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be interested in human beings? And it's like, well, how does focusing on an animal mean that I'm not interested in human beings?
Exactly, it's a manifestation of who we are. If you would permit me a brief digression, it is narrated that when the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, had the ascension to Miraj, and we were just celebrating that a few days ago, so it's still within our days, it is said that he saw an adulteress in heaven. And he asked about her, how did this lady get to this elevated stage? And it is said that on one occasion, despite all her misdemeanors, on one occasion she saw a thirsty dog.
Yeah.
So she took her cloak and put it in a well and just squeezed some of the water into the mouth of this dog. And that act of kindness, of giving a little water to a stray dog, was so beloved in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgave her all her sins and granted her a lofty place in heaven. So this idea of kindness to all of Allah's creatures should not be a surprise, because we repeatedly in the Holy Quran, when we seek Allah's closeness and we invoke Him by His name, Bismillah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most compassionate. It is not parameterized to just a particular kind of creation. That's what the benevolence of divinity is about. And where we seek to follow that teaching, we are to that extent being faithful to the tenets of the teachings.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a good point. So, I mean, looking obviously at the greatness of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, I think again today sometimes these great figures can seem out of reach for people.
Yes.
And they say, I'm so fallible. I mean, who am I? I can't possibly reach their status. So, why am I? What am I doing, in a sense? I mean, what are they there? In a sense, I mean, they know that they're there, but it's like, how can we even begin to attain that status? Or sometimes people use that to justify mistakes as well. So you say, well, have you thought about, or perhaps we could, improve in this way, striving to be like Ahlulbayt alayhim salam. It's like, well, I can never be like them. So, I am who I am. So how, obviously they were there as models for us. And what do they say about the possibility of reaching them?
Well, I think first and foremost, psychologically, we need to recognize what is a trap from shaitan. This idea that they are so far away that we cannot possibly hope to emulate them. That kind of defeatism is not what the teachings are about. It's not about gathering to celebrate their greatness from a distance and applaud and then go home. They don't need our applause. No. They've already got the fountain of Kawthar. Whether we remember them or not makes no difference to them. The difference lies in the practical changes in our lives. And I think to that extent we need to reflect upon what, in particular, Hazrat Abbas Islam teaches us. In his focus, dedicated, single-minded focus to the loyalty to the Imam of his time, and through that loyalty, his service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we learn a few things. Point number one is we need to be cognizant, mindful of the Imam of our time. So that we must not allow the veils of ghaiba, of the occultation, to blind us to his existence and his reality. And when we are faced with, well, okay, well then so what? We get this teaching of Hazrat Abbas about loyalty to the Imam of your time and service. Well, so what? What does that mean for me? I'm not Hazrat Abbas. I don't have his powers. I don't have his resources. I don't have any of his faculties. And besides, I don't have the proximity to the Imam of my time as he did. So do I just close the book and go back to whatever I was doing before? Or do we engage more deeply in a more creative way? Excuse me. And I think there are three aspects to implementing this, if we disaggregate it. Firstly, we need to understand the community we live in. So we are sitting here today in 21st century Britain. So there is a responsibility to analyze the circumstances that we live in. And this is what Hazrat Abbas did. If we look at his speeches throughout his life, including on the day of Ashura and in Karbala even before Ashura, he had provided a very lucid analysis of the state of society at the time. So if we are to follow in his footsteps, let's begin by looking at what's happening around us. Let us not be the ostrich with its head in the sand. Secondly, let's look at ourselves to understand our strengths and weaknesses. We do have resources, and we each have faculties. It's not just about money. It's about our friends. It's about who we have contact. It's about our skills. We each have a unique set of attributes that we can contribute something to. So let's look at how we can serve. And the more we look, the more we will be given tools to look. This is the aspect of grace. And we invoke grace in our search for how to reach grace, so that it is through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with Him, to Him. And when we do that, we get to the third stage. We combine our analysis of the society with our analysis of ourselves and what we can do, with the third aspect, which is tangible, measurable action. Not just some wishful thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could cure all those problems? Well, it would. But back in the real world, we need to do one practical, measurable thing. And I think it's great that if we celebrate his birth by having a resolution in our own hearts, that in his spirit of service to his Imam, I will do this one thing, practical thing, by this time, in this way. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to be something. So that's not zero. We don't just applaud from a distance at the great Khushali, at the great Wilada, the great birth, and then just go back to what we were doing before. One practical, measurable step. They say in business, in terms of personal development, what gets measured gets done. So let's have one measurable target of how we may follow the footsteps of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam with one action of service to the Imam of our time, by contributing to whatever community we may be in with whichever resources are available to us.
It reminds me of someone who told me that on the wiladat of Imam Ali alayhi salam, she decided to cook and go down to the homeless shelter. So rather than just going to the Hussainiya or the mosque and listening to, again, discussions on how great he was, she wanted again to do something practical, and she said that, you know, they warmly welcomed her food, you know, so much. And of course, you know, probably not a lot of people are going down to homeless shelters to feed them, or just to take care of them, or just to show that you care. So, and I think that this is something that the Ahlulbayt would love, you know, that, and again, she wasn't like feeding 5,000 people, probably, you know, not even 50 people, yes. but just some people at least, you know, that would have touched their heart in some way. So, some example.
I think that's a beautiful example, because when we go back to the teachings of Sakaya, when we look at the history of Hazrat Abu Talib, he was not known for being a wealthy person. He was a man of modest means. But the purity of his intention was such that he actually was given the title of Saqiyul Hujjaj, in that he was able to inspire people to come together and line all the roads to Mecca with kiosks serving the Hujjaj. So one with very limited means to be able to achieve the state of Saqiyul Hujjaj, well, Hazrat Abu Talib is an example for us in that regard. Doing just what you said, doing what we can with the resources we can, but the purity of the intention can then magnify the output, can leverage it way beyond the initial resource we may have been able to inject.
And I think also, I mean, sometimes you see those videos of, again, someone who's going through a lot of hardship. You know, often you get like the waitress in the cafe or something. So, and she's trying to put on a brave face, and so someone gives her $100 or £100 tip, and suddenly she'll just break up and start crying because she's trying to bear all of those struggles, you know. And so again, it's like it's not saving all of the struggling waitresses in the world, but it's one person who, making them feel different or cheering someone up, can sometimes inspire them to change other things about their lives as well. So it has a kind of a knock-on effect.
Quite often we become sanitized by all the examples of persecution, of suffering we have, and we are unable to respond because we feel it's just too enormous. But it does make a difference to that one person that we're able to help in that one simple way. And I think that is powerful for our own development and growth, because it removes that sense of being forlorn and unable to cope with the tidal wave of suffering out there. If you can be part of the solution, in one small way, you've made a difference to that one person. And in this regard, I'd like to conclude this point with a teaching of Imam Sadiq al-Islam, the sixth Imam, where he says, one who satisfies the thirst of a person at a place where water is available, it is as if he has freed a slave. Remarkable. Water is available, but just the act of sharing it. And he continues, and one who does the same at a place where water is not available, so something extraordinary, going out of your way, he says, it is as if he has enlivened a soul, one soul. But what is the power of that? He continues saying, and one who gives life to one soul, it is as if he has enlivened a community. So that we must not be embarrassed about doing a little bit, saying, oh, this is so small, it's not worth it. That idea that, oh, it's not worth it, is actually one of the tools of shaitan to get us to do nothing. And this is why I think it's important that when we seek to implement the example of Hazrat Abbas al-Islam, we make sure there is something measurable, tangible, something real that we can do, something achievable. Because with that one step, we can then be empowered to do more. And how many examples do we have of people trying to help one orphan, and that act resulting in a big orphanage? Someone trying to help one person with one small way, and then that person going on to help others and empowering them, so that there is a chain reaction. The bottom line is, it is not that we are unpowerful or lacking in resource. It is actually that we have great potentiality. We have the ability to set off that stone from the top of the mountain that can turn into a massive snowball. We may not know how big a snowball it can become. But if the person at the top of the hill had not pushed that little stone down the hill, it would never have become a massive snowball at the bottom. And this is where we need to go back to where we began, with tawakkul, with trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to begin that action with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Because Sayyid Imam Hussain in Al-Mizan makes very clear in his exegesis of this verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, when an action is commenced with my name, then I will add my faculty of infinite and being beyond time and place to that act of this person who is finite, with finite resources and finite time. So to give completion to the work that this person is starting.
Beautiful. Yes. I mean, and also, yeah, worth bearing in mind if someone is about to, again, give sadaqah or give charity, in some way or just help someone, again, to begin with the name of Allah when you're doing it, and to reflect upon, your intention when you're taking that action.
Yes, indeed. And when we look at the principles of generosity, inshallah, in part 3, when we look at modern psychological research and what it says about the psychology of gratitude, we see a number of aspects of this. But I think we live in a wider environment, and I think it's important to find points of contact with other teachings, particularly from the Abrahamic traditions. And the point you made just reminded me that we have in the Christian teachings the example of when Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, according to the Christian traditions, when he was in the temple in Jerusalem, and a poor lady came and gave an offering that was very measly and looked tiny compared to the great things that the wealthy merchants would come and leave at the altar of the temple. People started mocking her. And Isa alayhi salam, Jesus stood and he said, and he rebuked them. And he said, no, you do not see the value of the charity that this lady has offered, for she has just given everything she has. And it's that spirit of offering, whatever one can, in whatever way we can, whenever we can. That idea of being in a state of process is what's important. Because psychologically, what the teachings are doing is encouraging us to draw a distinction between a single act of doing that we may want to be huge and impressive versus the process of being in a state of constantly giving. So that when we're in the process, whether it's a little or whether it's a lot, matters not. What matters is that we're in the process of doing it. So it's not about that one act or not doing that one act. It's about being in that state where psychologically to give is a part of being. That is the lesson of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, I believe.
That's very, very interesting. And we've just got a few minutes before we go to break. I was just going to also mention, I mean, we've talked about loyalty to the Imam, but also loyalty to each other, as brothers and sisters on this path. And that's kind of obviously a thorny issue, because it's one of the, in a sense, we might feel, of course I want to be loyal to the Imam because he had these great, qualities. Who wouldn't want to be loyal to someone like that? Or who wouldn't want to be loyal to the Imam of my time because he's such a great figure? But trying to cultivate loyalty to each other in terms of, supporting each other or encouraging each other, looking out for each other, and again, I mean, it reminds me again of a narration by Imam Ali alayhi salam where he says, deal with each other in truth, give and take with each other in truth. He said, support me by means of this, which I find quite interesting, because by cultivating loyalty with each other and support of each other, that is another way of supporting the Imam.
Yes, indeed. And that aspect of mutual support can come in many different forms. Even a smile can be supportive. And that in itself can be a form of generosity. Supportiveness emotionally, supportiveness intellectually, supportiveness through various different kinds of work. But if we zoom out and look at this on a macro basis, you say the path is thorny. Well, it's worse than that. This is a path that is littered with landmines.
Yeah.
And we see many of our brethren murdered along the path of walking down this road. So where does that leave us? Well, I don't think we have a choice other than to continue walking. We have to engage. We have to engage with the wider Muslim community. We have to engage with people of all faith. And we need to engage with people of no faith as well. This cannot be something that we just keep for ourselves and our families and our community. That's not how the Ahlulbayt operated. So the spirit of generosity has to be open-ended. And why? Because the one who brought the teachings was regarded as Rahmatul lil Alameen. The Holy Prophet was given the title of being a blessing upon the worlds, not just for the small community of people who followed him. So if we are to be true to the teachings of Islam, we have to be open to the whole of creation. Not just to the whole of humanity, but indeed the whole of creation as a whole.
Thank you very much, and a good point to conclude on. And we're just going to break for Salah. Inshallah, we'll be back again after Maghrib Salah. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live. Sorry, we didn't break for Maghrib. We're going to be breaking for Maghrib at 9:12, inshallah. So apologies for that. I hope I didn't confuse anyone. So we'll just be continuing. We'll be concluding the program, inshallah, at Maghrib. And in this part of the program, we're just going to be discussing Imam Sajjad, alayhi salam, and how, again, in spite of trials and tribulations, we can still maintain gratitude as he did, and trust as he did as well, and also love as well. A lot of his du'as also talk about the experience of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Haji Ghulam Abbas, what were the points you particularly wanted to cover in this part?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When we celebrate the birth of Imam Zain alayhi salam, there are many aspects of his life that come to mind. But I think there are three aspects in relation to his psychology, the psychology of Sajjad alayhi salam, that are relevant for us today. The first is the way in which he encourages us to really strive to improve ourselves, whilst at the same time giving us the inoculation, the vaccine against arrogance. Because in his Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, as we've discussed before, so I'll be brief, in the opening stanza, he says, وَانْتَهِ بِنِيَّةِ لَأَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ, that you take my intention to the best of intentions, so that we can't then have the arrogant thing, oh, look, what a great thing I'm doing, I'm so pure. No, because he has taken us to that level. And secondly, we ended our previous discussion on the point about action, tangible, measurable action. Well, Imam Zain addresses this, because he says, وَبِعَمَلِي إِلَى أَحْسَنِ الْأَعْمَالِ, and take my actions to the best of actions, so that we are self-motivating within a theological framework, within the framework that everything we do is through his power. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Now that's important, because being able to defend ourselves from the seeds of arrogance is important, because if we work and we make progress and we think, oh, how great I am because I've done this, we've lost the plot. And this is where Imam Ali alayhi salam warns in Nahj al-Balagha that a sin that gives you a feeling of remorse is better than worship that makes you arrogant. So whenever we take a step, we say Alhamdulillah, but equally we need to be conscious that if other people try and say, oh, look, you're doing this work, therefore you think you're better than us. No, it's not the case. Because whatever we're able to do, we're grateful for. Just as if a beggar on the street holds out his cup and is given a coin in charity, he can't be proud of having got that coin. One can't be proud of having done that good work because we asked to be able to work. Take my actions to the best of it. So if we did a good action, it's His grace upon us to have been able to do that. And this inoculation, this vaccine for our hearts, so that we do not become contaminated psychologically by arrogance or ujb, as the dua talks about, this self-conceit about work, is very important. And in that regard, how we serve is then also important. And later in the dua, he says, وَجْعَلْ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى يَدِي الْخَيْرِ وَلَا تَمْحَقُوا بِالْمَنِّ. Let good flow out of my hands to the people, but do not make them feel obliged to me. Now there are two aspects of this. Let's deal with the second one first. That, I mean, the teachings are very clear that if a person makes the one to whom he or she has served feel grateful to them, then they've lost the value of that. It should be qurbatan ilallah. It should be for the closeness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I would like to end with the first part of this. The first part of this. وَجْعَلْ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى يَدِي الْخَيْرِ. That let good flow out of my hands. And this goes to the essence of service that we saw from Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam. But it is also a question of being grateful for being able to serve. This attitude of gratitude. So that we're not just grateful for that which we receive, we're also grateful for that which we're able to give. And when we look at the current psychological research, it's quite interesting actually. When people are undertaking research in the psychology of happiness and what makes people happy, one area of this research is in what they call spiritual emotions, such as the feeling of wanting to give to others, of generosity. And there was one experiment that I'd like to share, where a researcher brought together a group of students and had a control group as well. And the first group of students were told that every Sunday evening they should reflect upon 5 things for which they are grateful, for which they're happy, good things in their life. It could be anything. And after a period of time, this researcher monitored the well-being, the happiness of the 2 groups of students. The first group that regularly, at the end of each week, noted 5 things, and the other group that didn't. And over time, there was a divergence in the happiness levels of those who were consciously grateful. So developing this attitude of gratitude is actually good for our mental health. And it is not just by ritual that we're encouraged that 5 times a day after each prayer we go into prostration, to sajda, shazda shukr, when we say shukran lillah. It's not just ritual, it's actually spiritual scaffolding for our mental health, because it allows us to focus on the positive that's in our lives and identify them as stepping stones within the sea of problems we may be navigating. And it also brings us back to the beginning of our discussion in terms of stress management. When we are stressed by all the problems in our lives, focusing on that which is working through a sense of gratitude can create like stepping stones in the fast-moving river of the stresses, allowing us not to be swept away and to safely cross from one side to the other, from the beginning of one day to the end of one day, maintaining our sense of mental well-being, cradled by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Thank you. And we've just got 5 minutes till we go to break. And I think, again, something that strikes me about Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is that, I mean, obviously we hear about how, the terrible pain he experienced after Karbala. But also, I think that that's just one side of him. Because, you read in his du'as and in his sayings this joy, the joy for love for Allah, and he speaks like he's the most fortunate person in the world, and that's after he's been through all that.
Indeed, it is. It takes a special person to be able to write وَلَا تَمْحَقُوا بِالْمَنِ and do not make them feel obliged. Because when he talked about وَجْرِي لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى يَدِ الْخَيْرِ and let good flow from my hands to the people, لِلنَّاسِ, he meant all of people. Not just the good people, because history shows after Karbala, when Marwan bin Hakam, the architect of the tragedy of Karbala, needed protection in Medina, whose house did he go to? Other than Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam's. And he gave him sanctuary. So this idea of let good flow from my hands, وَأَجْرِي لِلنَّاسِ لَا يَدِي الْخَيْرِ, to the people, let good flow to the people. He implemented this.
Yeah.
So he didn't just write these principles of psychology in the Sayfa Sajjadiyya just as, theory. For him, it was the synthesis of spiritual experience.
Interesting. And I think also reflecting on where we are today, I mean, again, people can feel demoralized through, I mean, again, especially with the way that people are living. I'm picking up recently, a lot of people were feeling isolated, as an example. And then obviously when people are isolated, then they find it harder to practice, the deen. It needs that kind of, the brotherhood is a very important part of it. So how can, again, the example of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam help people who might be feeling a bit isolated?
Well, we go back to where we began, with the lessons of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, in reconnecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we go to that gift brought to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his holy progeny by Jibreel as an armor, as a protection against these kind of mental problems, these stresses. This armor, and in particular stanza 59 of the Ajoshan al-Kabir, we looked at the first line of that, beginning, Ya Habiba man la Habiba la, the beloved friend of one who has no friend. This idea of isolation that you speak of. When we look at the further along in the stanza, it says, Ya Rafika man la Rafika la, oh, the friend of one who has no friend. Ya Mughitha man la Mughitha la, oh, the helper of one who has no helper. Ya Dalila man la Dalila la, oh, the guide of one who is confused, who has no guide. And then it concludes further down, Ya Rahima man la Rahima la, oh, the one who gives mercy to the one upon whom nobody else has mercy. And then concluding with this point that you raised about isolation, saying, Ya Sahiba man la Sahiba la, oh, the companion of the one who has no companion. Therefore, teaching us very clearly that the emotion of loneliness is really a trick of shaitan, to keep us locked in the stresses that we experience, to create a separation from us and Allah. Because the truth is that we are not alone. We have never been alone, and we never will be alone. We may just have the veil of loneliness cast upon us by shaitan, but the truth is, the friend is always with us.
Thank you very much. Beautiful conclusion and excellent discussion as well. Thank you so much for very useful points. I hope you enjoyed the program, and again, Mubarak to everyone who's watching. Inshallah, we'll see you again next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Ahlulbayt TV, the holy household for every household.